So our question argues that the colonial leaders were driven by jealousy and sought higher status, and that this led to the American Revolution. Our thesis is the American Revolution happened because colonial leaders felt as if their power was being inhibited by the British rule. And our roadmap is the laws proposed by the British made it difficult for the successful figures in the colonies, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Ben Franklin, to maintain their higher status.
So arguably, the most prominent figure that was affected by the British rules was George Washington. The act that most affected him in his ways of work was the Quebec Act. The Quebec Act was the fifth law that was implemented by the Intolerable Acts, which gave the land that the British won during the French and Indian War to the province of Quebec. And as George Washington made all his money from selling land, this act cost him an actual fortune. And George Washington was the heart of the American Revolution, as he needed the British acts to be repealed in order to make all the money that he lost back. And the quote that I have that shows how he wants to be separated from Britain was, "A line should be drawn between Great Britain and the colonies, clearly establishing our rights. We must either assert our rights or submit or become tame and subject slaves like the Negroes to whom we rule as such arbitrary sway."
The quote I have is, "The Stamp Act imposed on the colonies by the Parliament of Great Britain is an ill-judged measure. Parliament has no right to put its hands into our pockets without our consent." So this is saying that any legal or commercial document that was on paper costed more money, which affected Washington because it would cost him a lot more money when he was selling his land.
So I had to talk about Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson was a huge landowner in America, and one thing he said, "I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences of attending too much liberty than those attending a small degree of it." And he says this because he believes that all Americans should be free and they should have the right to govern themselves. And the Proclamation Act limited Americans. Proclamation Act basically said that all the land east or west of the Appalachian Mountains, new Americans could not settle there, and that hurt his father's business and his business because he made a lot of his money selling land like George Washington.
So Franklin was born in a family who had only enough money to send him to school for 2 years, and although being the head of the post office, he couldn't have become a high-level official in the English government. As a result, Franklin was one of those people who tried to gain property and power by making revolution. A quote that demonstrates my point is spoken by one of the officials in Privy Council committee. He said that he is just one of the agents and the first move for his own purpose. In addition, Franklin aimed at weakened governments such as Mr. Hutchinson's in order to gain power. Mr. Hutchinson was a person who made choices depending on how his people thought. He was an amiable and capable leader. However, Franklin began to censor the letter that Mr. Hutchinson wrote to his best friend. The quote that support what I said is spoken by an official that the letters from Boston for 2 years past have intimated that Dr. Franklin was aimed at Mr. Hutchinson's government. Franklin and Mr. Whately and Oliver and also Mr. Hutchinson's are good friends that they communicate with each other by secret letters. However, Franklin treats the letters as public letters and thought proper to secret them for his own private purpose.
Ben Franklin was already in a really high status when he was seeking for higher power and status, but he wanted to get a higher in British government. He convinced Britain to conquer the new land and so that he can be the owner of it. But because he did not born in the royal family, he did not make the step he wanted. Ben Franklin left England and tries to revenge by gaining power, and he started working actively for independence. Ben Franklin was accused because of the letter shows that he was really close friend to Mr. Hutchinson. The quote from the reading says, "This is humiliating. Hour-long confrontation took place before the member of British Privy Council at the cockpit. While the councillors jeered, Ben Franklin refused to respond, and his silence was more powerful than words. Because of the silence, this silence shows Ben Franklin was upset with the British government, and he decided to quit and join the revolution so that he can get a higher status because that was one way that he can reach for higher power and status, and that was always something that he wanted.